Welcome to Living the Message, where we discuss how the message of Christ may dwell among us richly. I'm Eric Targe, and I'm here with Senior Pastor of the Moody Church, Philip Miller. Hey, Philip.
Good morning, Eric. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Awesome.
I'm doing good. I missed this past Sunday's sermon. I wasn't able to actually.
You were a truant. You were.
Yeah, I was on retreat with our college ministry, but I actually listened to the message in the car, and right away the opening illustration that you hit on, talking about greatness and glamour. It was so funny because just like a few hours earlier, I was actually talking about that. Isn't that crazy?
Really?
Yeah. So seriously. So
Wow.
I was by.
That's actually very concerning.
I know. So I was by the lake with a couple students.
Yeah.
And we were talking about like celebrities that we've met and all different things. And one of the common threads that kept coming up was people saying like, yeah, it's the worst thing in the world to meet your celebrity hero or your celebrity crush, right?
Wow.
Because then all of a sudden you realize, oftentimes it's like you built them up as this wonderful person, and then turns out like more often than not, they're not really nice people.
Wow.
So all of a sudden it's like the greatness is taken away. And so we were talking about like one person who's in a sitcom, and it's like they're like, yeah, I loved this person. I'm not going to say who, not on camera. Don't want to ruin their stuff. Maybe they just had a bad day. But they said like, yeah, I met him, and from that point on, I couldn't enjoy the show.
Oh, wow.
Because they were no longer great to me.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I thought, what a great focus for us to talk about. How does someone actually become great? So we were in Philippians 2 this past week.
Yep.
You have a lot to say about that, right?
Well,
like greatness is very different from the Philippians 2 perspective.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And glamour and greatness, they're easily confused, but they're actually, if you think about it, pretty easy to distinguish. Like glamour is all about the outside; it's how you appear.
Yeah.
Greatness is about character. It's about what's on the inside. It's about who you are.
Yeah.
And it's weird because all the marketers in life are trying to sell us glamour, right? That's what life's about. It's about having a glamorous life, having nice clothes and a fast car and, big house, glamour. And but what's weird is at a funeral, we finally remember what greatness is. It's selflessness. It's humility. It's graciousness and others-focused living. That's really what we mean by greatness. And I think that's what your friends are seeing. It's like, there was a character that was attractive, and then all of a sudden I realized that this person actually is playing an act, and they're not really as great as I thought they were.
Yeah, and I think that even happens at funerals sometimes, right?
Yes.
You have those moments, unfortunately, where a person
You don't know what to say.
You
don't know what to say. You want to say nice things, and you're searching for how to do that, and the greatness isn't there. And that's remarkable. So, and what's interesting is in Philippians, and this is kind of what we talked about this weekend, is that Christ is calling us to become like him, to become truly great, like him, which means the sort of the way that we could live in the world that is trying to accumulate and have and is all about us and our rights and our privileges and building something and making something of ourselves is actually the opposite impulse of the impulse of Christ who came and laid everything down, had all the rights and privileges in the world and the universe and laid everything down in order to serve and love and redeem us, and then calls us to follow him through the cross to glory and honor. And that is actually the pathway to glory and honor. So true greatness is actually accessed through humility and selflessness, which is counterintuitive, I think. It runs counter to all the marketing that we get. And
the way up is down.
The way up is down. And it is a much harder path, but that is the path that Christ is calling us on.
Yeah. So can I make you uncomfortable for a moment?
Yeah, sure.
Because what I want to talk about today is like how we fail in those areas. And the last thing I want anyone to think, because I know you, is that Philip's got this all figured out.
Right. Yeah, no, you do know me. Yeah.
So would you be willing
Sure.
to maybe just share an example of a time when you didn't do this well? Just so maybe people can even think of like, oh, yeah, Yep, I've done that.
Yeah, so it's sort of like an operating system, right? Like you have your apps and they sort of run on an operating system on your phone or your device. And there's like two basic questions that we can walk into the world asking. One is, what can I get for me? how can I defend my rights? Like what do I get out of this world and this relationship? How is everything here to serve me, right? Or the other operating system is, how can I help? How can I serve? How can I give myself away for the sake of other people? Just like Jesus gave himself away for me.
Yeah.
So how do I become like Christ? And those are two different ways, but you can sort of walk with a narrative into a situation and be operating in one of those two spheres. It's almost binary, right? It's almost like you can't do them both at the same time. And so you're asking about, like, we don't do this perfectly, and I don't. For me and my family, it's usually oriented around my kids. So, like, there's times when, like, say, Krista and I are, at the end of the day, we're sitting on the couch, and one of the kids pops up. We put him to bed, and, like, pops up and needs something, right? Hey, I need to go to the bathroom, or hey, I need a glass of water, or I'm hungry, or oh, I wet the bed, or whatever, right?
I just don't want to go to bed.
Yeah, I don't want to go to bed. Will you sing me a song or whatever? And Krista and I were so tired, neither one of us wants to get up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just like, this was our moment. Finally, we could relax. It was quiet. We're sitting down, exhausted at the end of the day. We just want a little bit of me time, right? And in that moment, there's like that sort of like, are you going to do it? Are you going to do it? Are you going to do it? Right? And I cannot tell you how many times I have, like, I know the right thing to do is like, okay, I'm here to serve. I'm here to love. How can I help?
Yeah.
That's the Jesus way.
Yeah.
But the Philip way is like, I had a long day. I'm tired. But so did Krista. So right, and there are so many times when I have just opted out and not been the one to just like get up right away. Maybe I'll get up reluctantly. After we do the chicken thing, are you going to go? Are you going to go?
Yeah.
Or the other one that happens all the time is our kids. So we still have young kids, and they'll pop up in the middle of the night. The chances of us getting through the night without somebody popping up and wanting to need help or climb in bed or need to be put back down is almost zero, right? And so there are times when we're like both sleeping, and then like the kid comes in and we're both waking up, and I have the choice: do I pretend to continue to be asleep, or
this is getting too convicting?
Or do I,
Rebecca, turn off the podcast? My wife, no.
and I more times than I'd like to admit, I fake that I'm still asleep because I don't want to deal with it, And so, but
yeah, no.
But it's in those moments I have a choice, right? And it's that simple. It comes down to those micro, individual, like, it's, we think about Jesus gave himself away, he died on the cross, this big macro, heaven to earth, becoming humanity. It's this big grand crescendo moment when he did that. But actually, he gave himself away every day for every moment of his life. That was the pinnacle of it, but it wasn't when it started.
And maybe that's the problem with so much of our Christian discipleship, right? That we're constantly saying, it's like, yeah, I'm willing to lay my life down for Christ. Someone puts a gun to my head. But all the little moments.
Or if somebody comes out, with a gun, and they're like, I'd throw myself between my family and them, and we want to believe that like in that moment the heroism would rise. Yeah. But what's much harder is to do what Paul says, which is, I die daily. I daily lay my life down. It's those small micro decisions of whether I'm willing to become a servant of all. And it's in the middle of the night when the kid comes in, who's going to roll over and get up. And it's those, and I'm either becoming more or less like Christ in those moments, for good or ill. Every one of those is a formative event in a chain of patterns of habits that will eventually make me who I become. And so every moment like that is an opportunity.
Yeah, what's interesting, I think, about what you're saying is that Christ is not calling us simply to die, but to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, right? It's very uncomfortable.
Because it's like, to die, it's like, okay, like it's that one moment, sure, I'll take the pain and I'll go and be my Savior, but to be uncomfortable is a lot more complicated for people. Things like, oh, dying might be slow.
It's a slow, painful, death of a thousand cuts kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's good, because what we get as we lay down our lives is we actually get ourselves back, right? If anyone who wants to save his life will lose it, but anyone who loses his life for my sake and the sake of the kingdom, Jesus says, will get it back for eternity. And so this is the life. We're getting ourselves back as we lay ourselves down. And this is the rhythm of following Christ. And it's a million little moments that add up into a life of greatness.
So can we talk about this kind of in the realm of different spheres,
Sure.
different spheres of
Sure.
influence, different places we are, and we kind of work from inner core out. But I'm curious, what do you think this looks like in that most inner core? So like if you're married, we're talking you and your wife. If you have kids, with the kids, I think you hit on that there. But like with friends, with aunts and uncles, like what should that look like in a close-knit sphere with your roommates or whatever you have going? How do we actually do the Philippians 2?
Yeah, I mean, that's so it gets very practical very quickly, right? So it's little things like sometimes like I have a tendency, I like food, and I have lots of preferences around food. Okay, and so you do too. You're
Yeah,
a foodie,
I'm a foodie.
and so you're more than I am.
Yeah,
but
Yelp Elite, baby. Yelp Elite. I've got my badge.
Okay, all right. So, but like I have preferences. So like if we're gonna go out to dinner, I usually am like, oh, that sounds good or whatever. And then I'll like survey, like, what do people want or whatever. And sometimes people want something very different than what I want, right?
Yeah.
And again, I have these, it's okay to be like, I really feel like a burger and I want to be assertive and say like, that's what I really, I have a high preference for that tonight. But at the same time, if I always do that, if it's my knee-jerk instinct to always be like, well, I want a burger,
Yeah.
and like I have a choice, right? Philippians says, look out not to only for your own interests, but the interests of others. Like, is this? And so it's just a moment where I say, well, what would Jesus do? How can I serve? How can I help?
Yeah.
Let's get Thai food. Let's get what you want, right?
Yeah.
Let's go get, and those little micro moments are actually super formative.
Yeah.
It's I see the dishes need done and I didn't dirty those dishes, but I'm going to do it anyway. Or whatever, right? It's those little habits of selflessness. And I think what Jesus would teach us is not to do them to draw attention. Hey, I did the dishes, make sure, right? But to actually just quietly learn to serve in ways that maybe don't even get noticed. I caught my wife doing this the other day. Our neighbors have some dogs, and the dogs sometimes, poop in the yard, and the neighbors sometimes forget to pick it up. And I saw my wife out there picking up dog poop. And she didn't have to do that. And I was like, you shouldn't be doing that. Like, let me do that, right? Or let me text my neighbor and tell him, like, go clean up your dog stuff,
Yeah.
But she just she's like, look, the kids want to be out there, and I'll just take care of it. And I just thought that is a beautiful, selfless, but she didn't even think about it, didn't need attention.
Yeah.
Like, it's those quiet acts of service that actually change the world. Yeah. And I think in our inner circle, that's how we love, it's how we serve. And we inject a little bit of the love and life of Christ into our sphere, and that has huge impact.
Laying down just the preference in all these situations, the preference to not be the one to have to do the hard thing. Or I even think of what C.S. Lewis said. I can't remember which book it is, but he talks about gluttony. Maybe you remember this illustration where he says that sometimes the person who's actually the glutton is the incredibly skinny person who's at a restaurant and demands that their tea be not too hot but not too cold with just this type of sugar and all these different things and so exact. And all their preferences actually drive the waitress insane and drive their friends insane because they just see themselves on such a high pedestal. And so to be willing to lay down what makes us comfortable, again, going back to that word, and what makes us feel like, oh, that's what I need.
Well, so this is interesting, right? We all think of ourselves as like the lead character in a movie. And the world is a movie about us. And we are the lead character. Everyone else is supporting cast. And we're moving through life. And this is our story and our,
Yeah. Totally.
And we I got to get my Starbucks drink with all my preferences. And everything has to be curated
Oat
around
milk.
me. Yeah. Yeah. Everything has to be curated around me. And we just that's our default setting. Like if you're in traffic, right? And you're on the highway, and you're in a string of hundreds of cars, and you look at the cars in front of you, and you're like, man, look at all these people that are in my way.
Yeah.
Well, you're in the way of the people behind you, right? But like we just think that way, right?
Yeah. We
just
never think
that
it's
way.
like, oh, they
Yeah.
might have something worse than me. It's like, no.
Yeah, it's like
I have the
I'm in a
pressing
hurry.
need.
I got to get where I've got to go. All this traffic's in front of me. Well, what if the guy behind you is driving his wife to the hospital because she has chest pains?
Yeah.
Now you're in his way, in her way. And like we don't think that way, but that's actually more the way the world is. And and so like I'm not the most important person in my household. I'm not the most important person in my friend group. Like learning to live like Christ is saying, I'm going to love and serve and actually become a beautiful human being by laying down my pride, my selfishness, my insistence on having my own way, my rights.
Yeah.
It's an amazingly different way to live.
Yeah, and I think part of what you're saying there that can really help us to live the message. I love the illustration you gave of the person in the car behind you. It's like their wife's having chest pains. It's also requiring that we actually assume that other people have more pressing needs, assume other people are more important than us, which is what Jesus is constantly saying. It's like, who are you to take the better seat? There could be someone better, but to actually practice holy assumption, which I don't think we tend to do.
Well, yeah.
Our heart doesn't let us do that.
Yeah, and even just to assume that maybe someone else around you is having a worse day than you are.
Yeah.
We're watching all these flights get canceled down in Florida and Southwest and all that stuff. All 1,800 flights canceled over the weekend. Unbelievable. Like everyone's annoyed, right? Can you imagine what it's like to be the customer service rep at Southwest right now and have it call after call after call of people yelling and screaming, right? Like they're having the worst day, and yet everyone's taking it out on them, right? And it's just this Jesus lens that helps you step away and go, well, maybe this isn't about me.
Yeah.
And how can I serve? And so to get up in the morning and just say, Lord, this is your day, and I'm here to serve. Teach me to serve. Help me to see opportunities. Help me to say yes to them. And as I cringe, because service always has a cringe moment where it costs us.
Yeah.
Right? Help me to, in that moment, realize that this is how you felt when you served me. And so help me I invite you into that moment. Give me the fellowship of sharing in your sufferings as I lay this down like you did for me. I'm now going to do it for others.
Yeah. I think for some people it's so hard, right? Because they feel like, well, this isn't actually like dying. This is just a little thing. But to actually practice that, of actually praying in that way, can be a great way of saying, no, I'm building that. I'm practicing suffering. I'm practicing being uncomfortable. Yeah. Well, you've hit a little bit on that most immediate realm of relationship, and then kind of like the wider realm as well, like when we're talking about the world and how we do stuff. I think, but one of the areas that I find regularly that people really struggle when it comes to integrating their faith into is their 9 to 5. And I know not everyone's 9 to 5. Some people are 5 to 9.
But their work week, right?
But their work week, like when it comes to their vocation. How do you think this works? Like, how does it work as a boss? How does it work as an employee? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, in some sense, again, I can go to my vocation and say, this is mainly about what I get. So I get a pay package, I get benefits, I get a lifestyle, I get a certain, right?
Yeah.
I get a parking space, whatever. I get things from my employment. But there's the other side of it, which is, what am I giving? If I'm here to serve, here to invest of myself, give of myself for the sake of others, what am I bringing to the table? And I think the best employees are always those who come with the attitude of, how can I serve? How can I offer myself in a way that's useful and good? Not coming to consume, but coming to contribute, right? And so I think that is a huge hinge, and we see that. There's an attitudinal shift that occurs. And then, of course, every interaction, every person, it's not just a vendor, it's not just a client, it's not just a colleague, it's just not just a bureaucratic, painful interaction that I have to go through this silly process and get this rubber stamp by these people I don't like working with or whatever. But all those interactions are not meaningless. They're opportunities to serve, to bless, to bring healing, to be Christ in those interactions. And I think it's so important that we remember that that's the scorecard. That's the game we're ultimately playing. is to become like Christ. So I can close the deal, but if I do it in an un-Christ-like way, I may have won the battle, but I lost the war, right?
Yeah.
So there's a different way, a different ethos of following the way of Jesus. And that requires some tension because it's a dog-eat-dog world in many ways in corporate life. And
There's a pressure to
there's
compromise.
a pressure, and it's not a godly in general pattern of behavior, and you have to figure out how not to get devoured by being too soft, but also living the way of Jesus. And there's a tension in that. The biggest question is in every one of these interactions: who am I becoming? Am I becoming more like Christ, or am I sort of diminishing into my self-oriented humanity that's not like Christ, right? Am I here to be served or to serve? There's the operating systems.
Yeah. Even that's a really helpful question to ask, whether you're an employee or you're, an employee or an employer, to ask the question, what am I actually doing here? How am I modeling Christ in each of those things? Because there's just such a great temptation to make your way in the world and even focus on this idea of, well, my primary call is to feed my family and get them a bigger house, or to sustain our lifestyle, rather than to follow Christ even if it hurts.
Right. And Jesus would say, what is it if you gain the whole world and lose your soul? Yep. It's because the scorecard is everything, right? If you think the scorecard is, I got to get ahead in my business, then you just kind of do whatever you need to do to get that done, right?
Yep.
But if the goal is, I want to be like my Savior in righteous holiness and goodness, then my job is a tool that the Lord's going to use in that, but it's not the end. So there are things that I won't do professionally to get ahead, because ultimately everything is about becoming conformed to the image of Christ. So that becomes a bigger deal, right, for us.
Let's take it to the church for a moment.
Yeah.
Because I think in work, everyone kind of has a job description, right? And so it's like, okay, I got to do what fits my job description. But I feel like sometimes in church, it gets a little more complicated, right? Because sometimes certain people say, like, I'm not called to that. I love how people use that word all the time, as though it's just like clearly in the scripture 1,000 times. Like, sorry, I'm just not called to stack chairs. That's just not. I'm not called to wash feet. Like, how do we understand how to do this despite sometimes preference? Like, how do we know what this looks like in the church to live this way?
Again, back to the operating system, right? We have a very consumer-driven culture, which is I go where the product's good, and I consume, and I pay for what I'm getting, but basically I'm here to be served, right? And everything's like that. Starbucks is like that. Hotels are like that. Everyone's there to serve you. Customer's always right? I mean, that's our economy. And so we get used to this sort of everyone catering to us thing. And so what happens when it comes to church, we have those muscle memory, we have that sort of self-oriented muscle memory. And so we come as consumers to church, and we think, well, this church has good preaching, it has good programming, it's got good music, I guess I'll come to this church. And then if one of those things doesn't make me happy, then I'll go somewhere else. And we just end up churning around, and we have people just going through the rotating, revolving door of churches, because it's about me. It's what am I getting out of this? Whereas the question, we could reframe it. The servant-hearted question is, how do I contribute? How can I be here to serve? It's like, maybe it's not so much about what this church gives me, but what I can offer this church, right? And maybe I'm here to give more than to receive. Obviously, a good church will feed you, right?
Yeah.
But also, it's like we need you. And I think it's the percentage of people that attend and then just leave versus like attend and serve and give back. I think those ratios, the joke in every church is 20% of the people are doing 80% of the work. Yeah. And it's a joke, but it's not funny that much because it's true.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we have learned to just be consumers in church, just like we are in every other part of kind of American culture. And so I think there's a mental shift there that Jesus would invite us into. And here's what's amazing. Everyone will tell you, everybody in church world knows that once you start serving, you buy in. The church becomes family. It becomes home. The thing that everyone wants in a church is to feel like they belong.
Yeah.
And the way you belong is actually by giving of yourself.
Yeah.
You give of yourself, and you actually feel more at home, more connected, more blessed. It's more blessed to give than receive. It's, again, counterintuitive. The way up is down. That when I actually pour myself in, I actually get more back. And that's the great loss. And unfortunately, I mean, churches always need people to serve, but it's not so much what we want from them as what we want for them. We want them to know this life of serving like Christ so that they might belong and be a part of the family of God. And that I think is the hinge,
There's a famous quote that's been attributed to so many different people. You probably heard it. Everyone wants a revolution. No one wants to do the dishes. And I think that in so many ways, of so many at Moody Church who are so well equipped, they're business leaders, they're lawyers, they're doing all sorts of things. And then we have right near us a Bible college with so many people that are raising up, wanting to be leaders in the church. What do you say to people that say, like, well, my gift is in the big stuff, and I don't know how to do the small stuff?
Right.
Like, how would you speak to them? How would you say this? What does this passage have to say to them?
Yeah. Well, Jesus says, if you're faithful in little, you'll be given more, right? More, you'll be entrusted with more. And I think that's the right path. Like, the more we serve, the more we just say, how can I help?
Yeah.
Like, it's not about us, right? That teaches us what it means to be like Christ. It forms character in us. And God isn't going to give big responsibility to people whose character is not going to, be able to bear it, right? We see that all the time. It just, things implode because the character wasn't there. And so I would just encourage people, like, start serving small. Start serving in insignificant ways. Start giving yourself away in small, unnoticed moments. Become who you're meant to be, and then let God deal with the rest. Humble yourself under the mighty hand of God. 1 Peter 1:5 or 1 Peter 5:6, I think. Anyway, humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, and in due time He will raise you up. And that's how it works. Just like with Jesus, He humbled Himself, gave Himself away. Therefore, God exalted Him to the highest place. And that's how it works for you and me. We do the small acts of service and trust the Lord that in due time, He will give us the responsibility or the honor that we might hope for, right? But at the end of the day, it's in the small giving away of myself that I become like Jesus. And that's when I become worthy of glory, is because I become like Him.
Yeah. I think even changing your mindset to see no work as insignificant, right? Like, so many times Jesus does something that's marvelous and says, don't tell anyone about this. I don't want any attention. Like, just and like,
right. Because it ruins it.
Yeah.
Right. If I'm quietly giving myself away in an unnoticed way, and then all of a sudden I get applause for it, in some sense it ruins the character formation, because now I've got this like ego boost out of it.
Totally.
And so that's why Christ says, do something beautiful and good, and then don't tell anyone about it.
Yeah.
Go take out the trash and don't tell anyone, even if they don't notice. That's actually the deepest forming kinds of things. It's the unrecognized servanthood that will be most forming in our hearts.
So I have a question I want to end on. Folks, I want to end on.
Yeah.
You and I already talked about this, so I'm not catching you off guard. But toward the end of your sermon, you really talked about where our culture is now, where the church is now, and you used this phrase, go against the flow. And so obviously in a world of pandemic, there are so many different things right now, especially in America, where people are yelling at each other on either side. How do you think Jesus would handle this pandemic? How would He go about this? And maybe what are some good diagnostic questions to figure out? Because you said that, I loved that phrase, go against the flow. How do you know which flow to go against? Like, what diagnostic questions can help you to say, don't go with that flow?
Yeah. Well, it is harsh out there, right? I mean, the vitriol, the anger, resentment, bitterness, rage, toxicity. I mean, it's easy to sort of jump on social media and like bash it right now, right?
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's doing that. But it's really true, right? Like, all the algorithms and everything are there to amplify the most harsh, most aggressive, most biting, the sick burns and all that, like that. That's what is amplified online.
because it keeps you there.
It does. And there was a study just a couple of years ago called, I think it was the More in Common study, and they found something like 7% of the online interactions are driving most of the content online. And it's like 3% from one side, 3% from the other side. And in the middle are 93% of the population they described as the exhausted middle. The exhausted middle. Like, we're just tired of all the cranky, yelly, like.
It's not surprising when you talk to people. You're like, yeah, everyone's
But it infects you, right?
Yeah.
All the anger around you, it starts to infect you, right? And so you feel yourself with anger and bitterness and rage and obstinance and just sort of this, I've got to stand up for my rights, and I dare you to do it, and I'm going to knock you down, and we got to go to war. And it's like, right? And there's this aggression, and it is so far from love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And the reality is, where the Spirit is, the fruit of the Spirit always is. And if the fruit of the Spirit is absent, the Spirit is absent. And we are influenced by these dominant cultural, emotional environment that is seeping into us and it's forming us. And we have to learn to walk with the Spirit and to live like Jesus and to lay down our rights and to serve and sacrifice and lovingly give of ourselves for others. And we're not going to learn that from social media. Yeah. We're not going to learn that from our cable news stations. We're not going to learn that from our politicians. We're going to learn that by attending to the way of Jesus and filling our minds with these things. And so part of our I think thing we have to realize is we have saturated our time with social media and cable news and talk shows, and like that's a lot of our day for a lot of us, and it's forming us into people that I'm not sure look that much like Jesus.
Yeah.
And so we have to ask the question, who am I becoming in the rhythms of how I live? And maybe it means turning the volume down a little bit on some of that. And because there's two ways you can go into the world, right? And this pandemic has really brought this out on the surface. I can say, what's best for me and my rights, right? Or how can I serve? How can I help? What does love mean and look like in this moment? And I probably can't live for myself and live for others at the same time. I'm going to have to pick one of those. One of those will form me into the image of Christ, and one of those will make me more of who Christ had to die for because it was ungodly, right? And there's a hinge there, and I think that's the choice we face. Is rights are important. I'm not trying to say there's never a time to stand up for rights. Jesus defended the rights of other people a lot. That's important.
Yeah.
But the way he did it was through self-sacrificial, others-focused, selfless love. And that is glorious and greatness. It's not glamorous, but it's great. Yeah. And I think he invites us to that. And so the pandemic is probably a pressure cooker that's going to make us either deeper and more consistent followers of the way of Christ, formed in his image, or it's going to peel us off and it's going to make us a lot more like the world. And so I yearn for our people to see that as the choice that's before them in every moment, every interaction. And what does it mean to love and serve? How can I help?
Philip, thanks so much for sitting and talking with me today. If you enjoyed this conversation, we encourage you to go and listen to the message that went along with it. And we hope that you will join us next time as we continue this conversation of how to live the message. So we hope that you were edified, encouraged, and equipped to now go and live the message.